Welcome to the kind of second part of my Interrail travel guide. If you haven't seen the first one, I made it kind of a year ago. Well, go back and watch that one first maybe, because that one takes up the general questions of what is Interrail, where can you buy it, in what forms does it come, and some general tips on where to go, what to see in Europe when you're traveling with train, as well as the most obvious do's and don'ts, I guess. In this video, I'm going to talk more about the positive versus the negative aspects of Interrail and Eurail in the big picture. Kind of the things that I don't like and the thing that I like about Interrail. Well, this is going to be a complete guide whatsoever. Let's start. Good evening and welcome to this second part of the total guide to Eurail, whether it's worth it or not. So like I stated in the intro, I made a video about a year ago before I went on my Interrail travels for this year, talking about the most basic things like where you can find Interrail, how much it is, which kind of variations Interrail comes in, as well as some more general tips. And also I had a little bit of recommendations on where to go if you're planning to travel in Europe. Some of these things that I said there, I'm obviously going to come back to a little bit in this show as well. But this is more going to be the things that I like and don't like with Interrail, or as the thumbnail will obviously say, the things that I loved and hated, because that's how you have to do it on YouTube to make people watch. There's no one literally watching a video saying like the things I thought was okay with Interrail. It just doesn't make sense. So for 3 weeks this summer I travel around Europe by myself with an Interrail pass in first class, meeting up with my wife in some cities and spending time with my son and his girlfriend. If you're interested in seeing all our adventures, I have made a vlog series about it, which I finished last week. All the episodes, 10 is still out there, so go back and watch that if you want to see us traveling around. And lots of things I'm going to talk about in this video is obviously related to that travel, so if you think that's interesting to see, go back and watch it obviously. I would like to start off by welcoming you to this show as well. My name is Frederick, you are watching Ponyo and Pool Shark. We are a travel channel focusing on everything from travel guides to travel tips like this video, but also on cruising and travel vlogs and everything travel related, more or less. We're also gonna do a new kind of thing where we dream ourselves away with the help of artificial intelligence and create like the cruise ships of our dreams, the hotels of our dreams, and so on. And that's gonna be a little bit in the future as well. Before we go into the kind of list with the things that I don't like and the things I like, I think it's important to come back to something that I talked about in my previous video. If you are planning on traveling Europe this summer or whenever, it is, to me, very important that you plan your trip before you actually buy your tickets, because that will decide the price. You see, Interrail comes in so many forms. You can choose to do like 4 travel days up to like a month, and then you can travel for as much as you want. There's like unlimited kind of combinations to create your pass. And if you're actually able to plan your entire trip before you buy the ticket, you will actually know how many travel days you will need. And also, if you can keep the travel days down to a minimum, it's obviously going to be more cheap for you. And I'm going to come back to the prices later on, and you're going to see that that matters a lot. And also a tip that I was giving at that time is that if you're traveling short distances, like between, so say for instance you want to go see both Dortmund and Cologne, they're like an hour away from each other or half an hour away, it's no point to use a travel day for that. Obviously you can buy local tickets and get away very, very cheap. And sometimes even if you're traveling longer distances, it might be much cheaper for you to just buy that ticket separately and don't use a travel day, because the travel days do cost pretty much. Interrail is not as cheap as some people would state that it is. You can make it quite cheap if you plan ahead and plan very careful, but on the other hand, like I stated in the previous video, it's sometimes actually much cheaper to just buy single tickets. So that's also something to take into consideration when planning your trip in Europe, that if you only need a few travel days, or at least long travel days, it might actually be a better option in general just to buy single tickets, because if you buy them long time in ahead, they can be quite cheap sometimes. Now with that being said, let's start with a list. I always like to start with the negative aspects first and then save the positive aspects for last. So this is the 5 things that I think is bad with Interrail and makes it hard to choose, and then, well, obviously this is my opinions and you might not agree, but let's start. So as much as these are negative things, there are more things to be concerned about maybe than things that I hate. If that makes any sense. Well, you'll notice. We'll start with number 5, which is, well, European railways in general. I mean, the biggest concern in a way with choosing to travel with Interrail is that the rail services in Europe is not very reliable. There's more or less delays every day wherever you go. In Sweden, where I live, it's disastrous, I would say. So in general, if you're not on a holiday, if you're traveling for business or whatever, railroad is not at all reliable, and flying or taking a car is a much better option. However, if you are not in a rush, if you are on your holiday and you don't have too much connections that you have to change trains, well, Interrail is a very, very nice way of traveling, obviously. But the railway system and delays is a big no-no, and something that you have to take into consideration. Also, when you are booking tickets that have a connection, make sure to see how long time do you have between the trains. Is it really worth taking the chance? I mean, obviously with an Interrail pass you have the possibilities to change to a later connection, but in this case always make sure that there is a later connection, so you're not getting stuck in some town or city where you don't want to be and don't want to spend the night, because if it was your last connection you can be in a lot of trouble, I guess, and maybe in the high season even having hard time finding a hotel, to be honest. So every time basically when I'm planning a connecting train, I make sure that I have at least an hour, I would say, between the 2 connections, and if not, and still, even if I have an hour, make sure that there are later connections. I would never actually book a trip which would end up in me arriving to my final destination late at night or with a lost connection or something like that, because that doesn't make sense. You're not going to be sure if you actually end up when you're supposed to. At number 4, we're going to talk prices on night trains. So with the Interrail pass you obviously have the option to buy reservations on night trains for a much cheaper price than they would be. And what I want to talk about here is more the original prices. If you've seen my videos from last summer, you'll notice that I did travel from Berlin all the way to Stockholm on a night train in first class, and that coupe was actually almost 750 euros if I would have bought it for a single trip between Berlin and Stockholm. Sorry, not Hamburg, Berlin and Stockholm. And I mean, that's obviously crazy. You could fly so much cheaper if you wanted to go from Berlin. I mean, obviously it was a nice thing, but with the Interrail, I got away. I think that the ticket was around 130 euros with the Interrail pass, which is still kind of a lot. I mean, you are already paying a lot for your Interrail pass. So spending that 150 something dollars or euros for a coupe is pretty expensive. And also I did have a first class Interrail pass. If you have a second class Interrail pass, it's obviously going to be much more expensive if you want to have a sleep cochette or a sleeper coupe or your own coupe. That's going to cost you more or less a fortune. You can obviously always more or less have a seat reservation and just sit through the night. That is nothing that I would ever consider, but I mean, if you're up for it, then obviously go for it. You can get that very cheap, from around 5 euros, I would say, for a seat reservation. Well, traveling night train, however, is a kind of nice way of transporting yourself, because you don't have to pay for a hotel night. You can just travel instead and wake up in the place that you want to go to in the morning and start exploring straight up. But the prices on night trains for reservations are sometimes very, very expensive, and if you do want to use the night train services, you have to book a long time ahead. They're gonna go up in prices so much that if you are, say, a month ahead, they're gonna be so damn expensive. So if you do want to make reservations for night trains, make sure that you're at least 3 months ahead, I guess, if you want to have a somewhat good price. The number 3 on my list is trains with additional supplement. So let me explain what a supplement is. So let's say, for instance, that you want to travel through the Italian border. Let's say that you want to catch a train from Munich going to Verona, and you go into the Interrail app and you search for trains. You're not going to find them. Well, you are going to find them, but you're not going to be able to see if there are tickets available or not. So what happened to me was that I thought, first of all, that okay, so all of these tickets are actually sold out. So I started Googling, I started to look for it, and found out that some trains, especially the ÖBB, the Austrian railway who run through the Italian border, has something called an additional supplement, which is basically a fee that you have to buy to be able to cross the Italian border. And that additional supplement includes a seat. However, you can only buy this supplement on the ÖBB homepage, not on the Interrail homepage, not on the trainplanet.com. So you have to go to ÖBB. But it took me hours before I actually understood that that was a possibility and that that was how it's done. And like I stated before, I have worked more or less my entire life in the rail industry, so I know a lot of things about tickets in Europe. And also, since I'm not flying because I'm so scared of it, I travel Europe by train more or less every year. So I can assume that for someone who's doing this for the first time, maybe watching this in America and planning on going on a holiday of a lifetime to Europe by train, this is actually something that you have to pay attention to me saying. There is some trains, and especially into the Italian border, that has this additional supplement, and you need to find out which ones and where you can buy these additional supplements. Otherwise, there won't be a chance for you to cross that border. Entering a train like this in Munich without the supplement will actually ending up in them throwing you off the train, basically, if there are no seats available. Just saying. At number 2, we're gonna stay with what we previously talked about. We're gonna talk about trains that requires a reservation. And basically, first of all, I don't have a problem with trains requiring seat reservations. In Sweden, more or less every train, this is actually something that you can write down as well, more or less every train in Sweden requires you to have a seat reservation. Otherwise, you cannot travel with the trains in Sweden. There's still some like regional trains that you can ride without a seat reservation, but in Sweden more or less every train requires one. However, we're going to talk about other trains in Europe as well, especially the ones going from Denmark into Germany. They require you to have a reservation and they sell out very quickly, especially in the summer times. So going back to what I stated earlier, if you're not being early to plan your journey ahead and buy these reservations, traveling between, for instance, Denmark and Germany or up to Sweden is going to be hell, because there will be no tickets available whatsoever. That's my cat, by the way, who's craving my attention. So back to what I said before, that planning your journey ahead is very much important. I would say that always try and make sure that you plan the entire trip like 3 months in advance, and also at that time look into tickets before you even buy the pass to make sure that they are still tickets available, or otherwise you'll have to change your route, and that can be a very, very long way if you have to bypass and go around places and borders and so on. So always make sure that you plan your holiday long in advance. At number 1, we are going to talk about the prices on the Interrail passes itself. They vary a lot in price depending on how you built your pass, so to speak. So when I looked into it and when I'm trying to meet somewhere in the middle, I've noticed that a travel day can come down to, I guess, around 50 euros a day, which not might seem as that much. However, like I stated, if you are willing to book your entire trip long in advance, you can actually make much cheaper tickets on buying singles if you are booking them like 4-5 months in advance, which I normally do. This was actually the second or third time actually that I've used Interrail. Every other year it's actually been cheaper for me to just buy single tickets. I always compare it with Interrail. I always start looking at Interrail passes, but realizing that since I'm always booking very early, I make much better prices on just buying single tickets. That's how it is. Now let's go to all the good parts about choosing Interrail, and there's obviously a lot. At number 5 is the obvious thing that when you have an Interrail pass, you can actually change your trip at any time whatsoever. So say for instance that you miss a connection, you don't really have to mind about booking new tickets. You can just board the next connection and show them your Interrail pass. However, something else that could also be positive is that, for instance, when I got to, I think, Augsburg, and I was going the last part towards Munich, I was supposed to have, I think, like 45 minutes or an hour there waiting for the next train. But then, however, there was another train that was late and was just coming in 5 minutes after I arrived. And since I did have the Interrail pass, it's just no problem to just board the train, show them your pass, and you can go. So you can change and mix trains as you want. And even if you change your route, for instance, during your holiday, I mean, let's just say that you meet someone while traveling who you connect with, and you actually decided on meeting up somewhere in Germany, and instead of going to Paris you decide to go to Dortmund instead. Well, you're free to do so because you do have your pass. You can change your connections at any time whatsoever. You're not stuck with single tickets if you have bought them, which state that you can obviously just travel on these specific trains and so on. You are free to do as you please with an Interrail card. You can change trains, you can change directions, you can do whatever you want as long as you have enough travel days to play with, obviously. At number 4 is the fact that you can more or less with an Interrail pass go just anywhere. Most bus companies accept Interrail as well, especially in Germany, so making a connection with regional trains, commuter trains, is not very hard to do. So you can get from a suburb in Berlin to a suburb in Stockholm and just using your Interrail pass more or less the entire way. That's a good thing in itself. You don't really have to buy so much local tickets and other things. You always more or less find some kind of a connection via the Interrail pass. Something that is both good and bad, and I talked about obviously in the bad part, and now at number 3 for the good part is making reservations. I mean, as bad as it is to have to make reservations, as good it is to actually buying a reservation and have your specific seat on a train. Especially in the summer when it can sometimes be packed with Interrail travelers and people on holiday. It's very, very nice to have your own seat. And the good part is that on trainplanet.com, which is the official site for Interrail, to buy your seat reservation, a seat is just €5, which is more or less nothing. It's very affordable to get your own seat, and then you never have to worry that you will be left without one. And you know that on a longer journey, say you're traveling 6-7 hours, you do have your own seat, and it's obviously very, very nice. At number 2 is the food and beverage that you can find on board the trains in Europe. I mean, obviously I'm not talking about some culinary gourmet experience, but I would state that in most train companies throughout Europe, they still have kind of decent food. I mean, it's obviously going to be, as you can understand yourself, sandwiches, easier microwaved food, cold drinks, some beers. However, I think that it's pretty good standard. I mean, when you buy a sandwich on the trains in Europe, they're normally, I mean, at least eatable. And also, I would say that the prices on dining in trains in Europe is, I mean, not obviously cheap, but still manageable. I don't think that the trains in Europe are overcharging for their food and drinks. They're normally priced at a somewhat normal price as going to a kiosk or whatever and buy your drinks ahead. You can find drinks for the same price more or less on board the trains. So if you're in a rush, if you are traveling through the day and wonder what you can do for lunch, I mean, go for the restaurant coach and see what they have, because normally the food is pretty decent and priced quite well. We are finishing up on the number 1, and it's got to be the app for Interrail that you download where you have your pass. It's a magical app. It works all the time. You have everything there, from tips on what to see and do in Europe to your pass itself. You plan your whole journey there. You can see connections, you can see trains, you can see if a train is late. Everything is there, and this app is actually your best friend throughout the holiday and a must. So before you actually leave for your holiday, a couple of days ahead, because the app is there, you can download it whenever you want. Get to know the app. That's a very, very good tip that I can leave you with, so that you feel familiar with it when you start traveling, because you are going to use that app on a daily basis a lot. And there's so much good information in that app. So just go out there, go crazy, go nuts, travel Europe, explore. Europe is amazing, and it's always something new waiting around the corner. I hope that you liked this guide. There will obviously be more train-related content in the future, so stay with us. You know all the jazz I'm not going to tell you. This is not the first time you watch a YouTube video, but it obviously helps us a lot with all the feedback, subscription, likes and things that we get. And in the end, always remember, it is not about the destination, it is what you make of it that counts. Till next time, stay safe. Yeah. you.